official branding or something behind us. We can have some logos or something done up so we can look like we're more official. But it's time for Do the Work. Terry and I are going to be discussing cycles of rest, Sabbaths, if you will, set-asides for personal and spiritual development in the work of evangelism. But before we get there, Terry, how you doing?
I'm great, man. Speaking of rest, I just got back from the beach weekend, so I wish I could say I'm completely rejuvenated. It's Tuesday. It's already gone from just a couple of days there. But I do feel better. It was great. I feel a lot better than I did, so it's fantastic.
It's an interesting phenomenon in some ways that, the different ways that we approach an upcoming thing, even if it's a physical activity, if we call it rest, it becomes restful to a certain degree. But we'll
get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a few folks joining in. Hopefully everyone will catch in the new circumstances. This is, by the way, the most watched religious broadcast on Twitch. And so we need to make sure we continue to plug the minor, tiny corner in which we are.
Half your audience just is like, what's Twitch? What's Twitch? I don't even know what that is. Now they're going to go find Twitch thinking to get some alt-right social media platform.
Yeah. As of yet, the infrastructure does not exist for us to stream to MeWe or Parler, but when it does, I will make sure we go there.
Yeah. I can't wait to see us on parkour. Okay, so here's here's our question for the morning as we get started. My favorite holiday is Thanksgiving. Okay, which is, by the way, why I'm so adamant. You people with Christmas trees up and Christmas music, no, you're ruining my favorite holiday. If you drive by my house right now, there's an inflatable turkey in my front yard because Phyllis, we are not twins at all. Please. Blue plaid, beards, and spiky hair does not make us twins. One of us reads, the other is illiterate. This guy. Okay, so favorite. Here's a question about Thanksgiving. What is your favorite side dish? Okay, that's number one. Dressing does not count because that's just part of the main course. It's turkey and dressing. Okay. Also, turkey. I'm assuming we're both going to be on the same platform this year, which is smoking our birds. But here's the question: dark or white meat on the bird? So, favorite side dish, dressing does not count. Dark or white meat?
All right, so we'll go through the whole process. I think side dish, if you take your dressings, which would include to be gravy too, that's part of the dressings category for the bird, off of the table. Probably in the past has generally been a hash brown casserole with one exception. Because going forward, it's changed. The historical exception for me is Charlotte Flowers green bean casserole, by far of all the sides available since my youth till to now.
Has that got the onions on top and all that stuff?
Right. It's a very simple recipe. There's nothing very complicated about it. But
cream of soup, green beans, and crispy onions. That's about it.
Right. But that was the first time I had it, and I'm disappointed if it doesn't make an appearance on the Thanksgiving table. Going forward, twice baked potatoes are a big Olden Camp thing that I always look forward to. And probably I'm trying to continually make some more healthy food options at each of these holiday meals. So there's a baked squash casserole that's really good.
Thanksgiving is not healthy. That's against the rules. Stop it. Okay.
So out there. But that's the historical arc of my favorite sides. For the white dark meat conundrum, it's always going to be white meat with the crispy skin if it's a smoked turkey.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about going with just the breast this year for the turkey. Maybe just smoked turkey breast and bypassing the whole carcass thing. That's just a potential. Well, I think there's a lot of win for that, by the way.
And for sure, and broccoli and rice is great too. Phyllis brought that one up. That's another positive as well.
It's all about the squash casserole. Squash casserole for me, 100%. But it's got to have the crackers in it and the cheese because, it's not healthy. Just because it says squash doesn't mean it's healthy. A typical table for us has the has the mashed potatoes. That's our potato on there. Usually mashed potatoes, squash casserole. There is I think generally a green bean casserole. There's sweet potatoes. I'm not a sweet potato guy at all. Sorry, that's just not my gig. But squash casserole is where it's at. And dressing, by the way, that's a whole other question. But dressing for me is already so moist you don't need gravy on it. That's where I'm at. It's got bits of chicken or turkey in it, and it's fantastic. That's the way you go with dressing. By the way, Phyllis throws out there blackberry pie. A lot of people pumpkin. I'll tell you what, if you do Thanksgiving right, I don't want dessert because I'm so full on the good stuff. I don't want any dessert. That's where I'm at. It's my favorite holiday. I'm very opinionated about Thanksgiving, by the way. Very opinionated.
Right, Brother Walls is bringing up a historical moment for us. I think one year we went to a Chinese restaurant like the day of or around the day with a bunch of friends in the Bay Area for Thanksgiving. In addition to all the other, regular family stuff. Although the triple Thanksgiving 1 year in Bowling Green is still my peak effort to achieve greatness. Was 3 full Thanksgiving meals.
I cannot.
All in the same day.
No.
The Renfro
You know what's
house,
funny is like
the Flowers house, and then the college students.
Let's admit this: that Thanksgiving, what's so funny about Thanksgiving is like you eat. Usually for us, it's around 1-2 o'clock, and about 6 o'clock, you wake up from that tryptophan coma, and you decide I need to eat. It's not even because you're hungry. It's just because like there's a requirement on Thanksgiving that you eat Thanksgiving leftovers that night, whether you're hungry or not. Like you go to the refrigerator, you get the stuff out, you heat everything up except for the turkey. You eat that cold for some reason. Never figured that out. But you eat all of that stuff, and you're not even hungry. But that's what Thanksgiving is all about. I mean, it's fantastic. I love it.
All right, it's time. So let's dig into.
Can we still keep talking about Thanksgiving? By the way,
we've got more Tuesdays. We got more Tuesdays.
Come on, man. I'm in my happy place now. Like I don't even need a Sabbath right now. I'm that happy. I could work another 8 hours right now. I'm just so happy about Thanksgiving coming up.
Good.
Yeah.
We can serve that way. So there's something that Terry and I talked a little bit about this week so far, and we've kind of discussed it in the past. A couple of years ago, I think our first year of broadcast, we talked about it in regards to vacations and creating some space and getting some stress relievers by doing things that aren't preaching specific. And today we're going to talk about some other aspects of the work in regards to some biblical rhythms. I think there is some importance to understanding the way in which the Israelite nation functioned with its Sabbath structure and its additional kind of rest periods for the land, or rest periods for the people, etc., but also for us. Our culture doesn't really value rest in aggressive American capitalistic views. We see rest as the end of the line, where I want to suggest having that siesta concept is a great thing to approach through a couple of ways. Once we're going to talk about weekly, maybe building some structure into your week where you kind of push away and back away. Secondly, talking about some annual things you can do to push towards, giving yourself some space schedule-wise, and then also on a regular basis, because there's a couple of things you can do preaching and teaching that's going to change that dynamic. And there's a book that I just recently finished. It's a fairly new release. It's called The Deeply Formed Life, 5 Transformative Values to Root Us in the Way of Jesus by Rich Vidalis. And in that, he does talk often about his particular approach towards taking breaks. If we want to take the formal terms of Sabbaths off of it and put just, hey, let's create some space.
Yeah, space is important. I think one of the things that's interesting is even let's put it this way, even the U.S. government realizes that in your workday there's a need for mandatory space, right? You work a certain number of hours. My daughter works at a restaurant. She works a certain number of hours. She has to take a certain number of breaks. There's a mathematical formula for all of that. You work an 8-hour shift. You're required to get a 30-minute lunch break and 2 15-minute breaks. And I just think that's pretty interesting to point out. If the world knows that you need rest over a period of a work day, and I doubt the foundation for that by the Labor Department was, hey, the Bible says that the Sabbath is needed. But if the world knows that, then we need to know that as well. The danger is in our culture, by the way, that with those who are on what we call salary positions, those become voluntary instead of mandatory. And so what happens for most of us as preachers is a lot of times we don't provide ourselves even those daily breaks that may be needed and required. And we certainly don't provide ourselves those weekly, monthly, or annual breaks as well. So there needs to be something considered about that. And even to the point that one of the great things about creation and what the Bible says and what we even know through agriculture today, even the land needs a break every so often for itself to be refreshed. Even the ground needs that. So I think one thing we're not going to really have to debate is the need for some kind of rest or break. I think we all realize that's there. Today, probably we'll spend more time talking about how do we facilitate that need.
Right, and let's just start real simply. And this is probably shifted for a lot of the preachers that Terry and I know over the last 10 months. Whatever they were doing 10 months ago is now different than the present context. But let me talk about my past practice and how I've adapted that and kind of finally gotten to a more healthy balance in all of this. So step number one in the past was to try to make sure that all of my planning work, my written work, my notes, everything for Sunday were finished Thursday afternoon. Thursday by 5 was my cutoff. I wanted my manuscript done. I wanted my class notes done. I wanted my media done. I wanted all of it done. So that left me Friday, Saturday, Friday being a little more flexible, Saturday being family day, to separate and kind of mentally and emotionally prepare. And so then I try to narrow the time too, so that by 5 o'clock, unless I was engaged in a one-on-one Bible study or an evening event with a congregation or something like that, I was out of the office. And so that was that general practice. And I pretty much just tried really hard to own that space. What about you, Terry? Did you have any kind of structure? This is all pre 2020.
Yeah, so let me say that for me, I always, and look, a lot of this goes back to who mentored you in preaching, by the way. I think that's one of the things that always kind of,
What's that?
yeah, exactly, impacts you. Because the internship I went into took Mondays off, that's always been my practice is, my whole week is geared towards Sunday. Sunday's like the culmination of the work week for me. And depending on your Sunday and how much you have going on, Monday mornings are often really, really tiring. So I take Mondays off. Now, let me explain what that means because I think people still are confused because they'll call me on a Monday and be like, oh, I didn't mean to bother you on your day off. Like, there is no such thing as a day off if you're a preacher. So when we talk about that Monday's my day off, that doesn't mean that I don't do anything on Monday. It just means that on Monday, I'm going to... Edwin, you're not wrong. I'm going to sit back and do less. I may do some reading that's more relaxing. I'm going to be at my house during the day on Monday. I'm not going to go to my office. I'm still going to look at email and I'm still going to answer phone calls and I'm still going to talk to people. That stuff doesn't change on the Monday day off. It's just on Monday, I'm not going to go into the office. I'm not going to do any intensive study on that day. But the other thing about this is, by the way, is I think needs to be said is even when I go out of town or I'm off, and I think you're this way, Phil, too, I'm still constantly thinking about things to do with the work. Like that never stops. You're constantly meditating on stuff, and I'm just going to use that as the loose term for everything, stuff. My sermons, even pre-COVID, contrary to what Edwin says, are always finished sometime on Friday. I do work Friday because I take Monday off. Generally speaking, though, I am pretty much done with everything by Friday, but I'm also that guy that will still do some things on Saturday. And I'm also that guy on Sunday morning. I'm up at 5 o'clock reviewing things from pretty much 5 o'clock till at least 7 or 7:30. And doing things along those lines in order to be ready mentally for what we have going on. And that does mean Some of the outline things get changed Sunday morning. Some of those things get altered on Sunday morning. But Monday was really my day of rest. And Saturday, even though technically I try to take over the family, that doesn't mean I say no. And that doesn't mean that I don't do things if they need to be done on Saturday. So that's the key to all of that. But pretty much, even now, Monday's kind of my day off. Now, I'll say this, in the day itself, one of the things that I do, and I don't know how you are, Phil, but I work better in the mornings. So right now, especially since I'm a caretaker, I go into my office in the mornings till about lunchtime. I go home at lunchtime. I take care of my mom for lunch and my father-in-law, make sure he's taken care of. They're both in our house in this caretaker arrangement. And I stay home for the rest of the day, but I do some lighter reading and some things that aren't as stressful and challenging unless I just have some things left over in the afternoon. And I may save my phone calls or letter writing or card writing till the afternoon that requires less brain power in that sense. So even my days arranged that this is my optimal working time. Part of that goes back to a book I read 25 years ago, or 23 years ago, called Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald, that you figure out where you work well and you set your schedule according to that. And there are some times that you block off time that you're just not going to answer phone calls or do anything because that's your work time. So all of this plays into your scheduling about what works best for you and how you arrange everything. And if I have a long day, everyone mentions the post-lunch, mid-afternoon power naps. You know, we can laugh about that, but I know there's days that are hard days that maybe I got to do a lot of work in the afternoon. I don't want to. I'll set a timer on my phone and lay back and take a 15-minute power nap to refresh in order to be able to finish the afternoon. You got to know your body and know what you need to do for that. I think that's important.
So some of the themes that are consistent there is kind of planning workspace where you leave space for not work things. And my side note too, like when I'm not in the office, and that's kind of that's like the totem that I go to. Like I'm in the office, this is workspace. I'm out of the office, it's not workspace. When I have an idea or a concept, I'll note it down either in the notepad on my phone or on a physical notepad, because there's sometimes where I'm not even touching my phone. Like it's gone. Like I'm not going to fool with it. And so those are things that kind of help create that. Now I want to insert something in the conversation is that probably most of the men that are doing quality work that I know struggle with, maintaining that break space. We struggle with cutting off and separating. And so I wanted to kind of encourage here the deep benefit to the quality of your life and the quality of your work if you can consistently carve out that whatever time works for you. This is the time when you are dad. This is the time when you are husband, and just those things. This is the time when you're just the disciple. And you make sure that you protect that time so that you can grow in those other areas. And so on a weekly basis, you got to have it there. And so whatever you're going to be, and by the way, my shift from Monday to that Friday kind of shift over took place after reading Barry Kirchable's work on preparing men to preach. And I was like, I'm going to try that. It was really simple. It's like,
right.
It looks like healthy. My kids were getting to a point where Fridays and Saturdays were more often including activities. And I didn't want to be in the office when they were playing a game or going on an adventure. I wanted to be on the adventure with them and be present, not just physically there, but mentally there. And so by having my sermons and my class notes done Thursday allowed me the emotional liberty to be there and not worry, is everything ready? Is everything good?
And if that's not your normal day off, then you need to, when you know those things are coming up, you need to rearrange that. I'll also argue this that I think is interesting is, especially for me at times, some of those Friday activities were kind of a part of my work that we don't normally think about because of the context I was able to generate through some of those activities. So, but you have to rearrange your schedule in a way that meets all of your needs. And I'll add this. I think besides the family time, you need to find some kind of hobby or escape that is there for you when you need it, because sometimes we take time off, but we just go sit in our house and we don't really reboot mentally. So for me, that's going to be getting on the water and going fishing. For Phil, that's going to be getting in a canoe on the water or going for a hike. Um, you need to find that activity that when you get in that mode that you need that kind of refreshing, that you have the ability to do that. Um, and I mean that emphatically. If you don't have that, if you can't say this is my release, whether that's golf, whether it's hiking, whether it's a canoe, whether it's fishing, whether it's going to the gun range, there's a lot of things. Disc golf, there's a lot of things out there you could do. If you don't have that, you need to find that for you. Because there's going to come times where you just got to know, I got to get out of the house and I got to go somewhere where I can just get relaxed and get away from everything. You got to find what that activity is.
Right. Let me just kind of quickly, before we shift to what I've kind of classified as the annual stuff, which is like family vacations, family trips on the personal side. Remember the biblical models that exist. We've got a deep spiritual presentation in creation. Secondly, we've got the practices of Israel that show Sabbath concepts built into their weekly routine, their annual routines, where there's feast days, there's break days, and then even greater than that, when you're going to have Jubilee concepts that come into their whole economic culture. The land is treated with these levels of rest. And so as a component of creation, this is a structure that appears all the way into the work of Jesus too, where he will break off from his public ministry to engage in personal prayer and private time where he is communing with God, that seems to have that same kind of structured pace and setting to it.
And you mentioned holidays. My wife's a teacher. My kids go to school. So here's a good example. Tomorrow's Veterans Day. They're out of school. Guess what? I'm not going to the office tomorrow. I mean, that doesn't mean I won't think about things. It doesn't mean I won't go over things. It doesn't mean I may not get up at 5 o'clock and work for 3 or 4 hours while they sleep in. But I'm going to, for the most part, be with my family tomorrow. That's what I'm going to do. And I encourage you to think that way as well. If your kids go to school and they're going to be home tomorrow, take tomorrow off. Be with your family. And plan accordingly for that, by the way. So, for instance, my article for this week was written last week to plan for me to be off tomorrow. I'll make some allowances for more time, plan accordingly so you can take that time off. Those kind of things, you have to plan ahead. And I think that's one of our problems as preachers. We kind of like to fly spontaneously through life and just let happen what happens. And I'll tell you that I used to do that first 10 years of my preaching, Phil. That was probably one of the most revolutionary things. And what forced me to do that was when I was in Memphis, larger group, but also one of the great blessings I had was a secretary, okay? But there was something else that came with that. Now there were 2 people that had to work on my schedule. And I had some things that were her job depended on me getting done at a certain time. I no longer had the liberty to just get done with my sermon whenever I wanted to get done with my sermon. I no longer had the liberty that if I didn't get the article done, I could just come in early Sunday morning and print the bulletin off because she printed the bulletin off. Mm-hmm. So that forced me to reassess my disorganization of life and make myself plan. And I think that's one of the things about all of this is that you've got to be better at planning. You just can't go through life thinking, I'll just get to it whenever. You've got to have a schedule. I'll say this, Edwin has done a great job of that in the past. I mean, there was a time where Edwin had his whole day scheduled down to 30 minutes. Now, he never kept it, but at least he tried to have his whole day scheduled down to every 30-minute block. I'm not saying you need to go that far, but you do need to have an idea what you're doing when you're doing it and make according plans for like taking tomorrow off. That's the kind of things you need to do.
Right. Let me throw this out there. If folks have like successes or concerns in their own work of preaching and they feel comfortable sharing it in the chat stuff, go ahead and do that. If you want to send it in other ways to us and bring it up and discuss it in the broadcast, we certainly will be happy to do so. But like, that personal weekly stuff, you got to build a schedule. But then you also have those family settings. And one of the things that happens, I don't know if this happens for you, Terry, but when Terry and I probably have the same experience, when we go somewhere and we're on vacation, we're old enough and connected enough through various parts of the country that going to visit a congregation is a little bit different than when we were younger. When I was younger, I'd visit somewhere. I could go to the worship assembly on Sunday mornings and wholly invest myself as a visiting participant. And now it's much more likely where I can be easily distracted because I'll see an old friend, maybe I'll encounter someone who I have a connection with, and so it's difficult to separate those things. But let me tell you, folks, it's really important that when you're in those vacation spaces with your family knows that that's going to be different for you, but don't make it unnecessarily different for everybody. Um, be on vacation, be in a rest mode. Let someone else teach the class. Let someone else lead the sermon, and it's gonna be okay. Actually, it can be
Yeah.
great.
So one of the things I do on vacation anymore is I do not take a suit and tie with me. I purposely take
That doesn't change anything
sometimes
for
even
you.
no, it does, but I sometimes even wear jeans and just an untucked shirt like I'm wearing today on a Sunday morning, which I know breaks the dress code a lot of places. But I do that because I want to physically prevent myself from accepting that last minute invitation to preach because it is intentional rest for me. And it's an intentional rest for my family, by the way, because if I go and I preach a last minute sermon, guess what? They're going to end up getting to hear that same sermon they've heard 18 other times in similar circumstances. Um,
Yeah.
so, and by the way, it is good. I think this is one of the interesting things about that. I have figured out over time, and it took a while, that it actually is good for me not to speak sometimes and to listen to somebody else. That's part of the rest process for me. Um, and so if you have to put a physical barrier in your way, like not bringing any sermon notes with you, so you can't accept that, then do that. I'm a big proponent of that, of not being treated, as Edwin called it, as a visiting dignitary. Because by the way, you're going to already, wherever you go, you're going to have a lot of people that know you anyway. That's going to be really difficult for most preachers our age. But don't set yourself up to be in that situation where you're asked to do something. Now, if it's a small group that the preacher got sick last minute, that's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
But overall, try to intentionally give yourself the space to not feel like you have to accept some kind of invitation like that.
Right. Here's a couple of things that I try to do that are part of that. Number one is while I do want to know the schedule of assemblies before I get there, and I try to quietly find those things out, I always intentionally get excited about whomever is going to be speaking that Sunday, teaching that class, because I really, really want the benefit of being a recipient as much as I might be a giver in this rest phase. And so when you're on vacation, plan it that way. Further, I'll just add this. If you can arrange it so you're gone on Sundays at times. I would include elders in that caveat too. Like it's okay to be out of town on Sunday. In fact, it could be good emotionally and spiritually for both you and the flock to have that space. And so plan for it, acknowledge it, and kind of accept all of those steps. It's great to hear those other guys do their good work and be a recipient of it. And so on your vacations, plan for it. It's a pretty normal thing. Find different ways to work around the schedules, to work around your travel times. If you've got flexible schedule stuff, Monday's a great quiet day to drive. And so coming back from somewhere on a Monday morning, in a lot of places, is a great afternoon drive, as opposed to got to get back on Saturday night. That
In
you
fact,
won't be happy in the end.
my favorite vacation schedule in the summer when we're not in school is Thursday to Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Thursday to Thursday. That for us, for our family, works great. We leave Thursday morning. We come back Thursday morning. I've got Friday in the office to wrap up whatever needs to be wrapped up. Gives me a couple of day cushion to make sure I'm ready for Sunday morning. And I've planned accordingly, by the way, when I leave on Thursday. But traffic's better. I'm going to be there. That's my favorite travel time when it works for us. So you think about that. By the way, let me say this about we're talking about annual and vacation. There was a time in my life, by the way, where I had 3 vacation weeks. The way that my arrangement is it has been for probably the last 15 years is 3 vacation weeks and then 4 meeting weeks and then 1 week at lectures or some kind of thing like lectures, which by the way for me is probably the closest thing to a sabbatical for me. When I go to the lectureship, it's as much about seeing friends like Phil and spending time with them and having discussions to get my batteries recharged as it is about actually attending the lectures. In fact, sometimes it's more that way. And I don't make an apology for that, but that's when Edwin and I hang out a lot. And so when we get to see each other because he lives in Tampa. So for me, that's important. But there was a time in my life where I didn't use all my meeting weeks. Not my meeting weeks, but my vacation weeks. I may only use 1 or 2, but not all 3. And after a couple of years in that, my wife actually had a talk with me and shared her resentment of that fact. I was doing that because, quite honestly, as a control freak, I just didn't want to take another week off and be out of the pulpit another week. My wife said, you need that week. We as a family need that week. And unlike a lot of places, vacation weeks don't roll over for me. So if I don't use them, I lose them. And so what that changed to me is even if we didn't go out of town, I took a week off and we weren't there at our home congregation that week. We would be quite off for that week and have a staycation. Maybe go to the lake, maybe do a lot of things that way. But use the time you've been blessed with to free up that. Your congregation needs a break from you too, by the way. I think that's one of the things that needs to be thrown out there.
All right, there's a structure for that. That's my last point here. Edwin's throwing the devil's advocate question there. I always kind of want to snarky say the devil doesn't need an advocate, but I get his point.
Yeah, he's got plenty of those.
Right.
But Edwin is a good devil's advocate.
This is something I think is really important. In your local work, you need to make sure, even if you're the single guy there, the single fully engaged evangelistic guy, or if you're making tents, that you're not the only voice teaching the congregation hears.
Right.
Other men can teach, other men can preach, give them that space to do so. And there's a couple of ways to approach it. When I moved to work with the church at J. Woodson Road, we moved into a structured plan that had a couple of key opportunities for the men on a regular basis. Number one key opportunity was every 5th Sunday. There was going to be 2 speakers from the congregation doing the Sunday morning, Sunday evening sermon. I might still teach the class. Second thing that was going to take place was that we had a monthly singing night that concluded in a extended invitation exhortation. And that was going to be a rotation of all of the competent men in the congregation. And so that gave 2 key idea or opportunities built into the structure to let the voice be of a bigger format. Here's another thing that a lot of congregations do in various ways. Some congregations do extended gospel meetings, weekend things. But there's also another option, which is what we're going to do at Eastside this year, which is partially for me. This benefits me, the evangelist. We're doing a summer series. We're going to have 12 different speakers working through the minor prophets on Wednesday night. That means that the congregation has the benefit of hearing those 12 different approaches to a series of lessons that give value to the congregation, but they also give value to me, because that means that responsibility isn't going to be on my table, and I'm going to benefit from the blessing of having those different perspectives come in and strengthen the entire group together. And Edwin's right. Sometimes there's opportunities that come up like that. I try really hard to maintain that space, but I've never and will never turn down an opportunity to preach, even if I'm not properly prepared with attire. I just try really hard to adjust the preparation phase to not disrupt the vacation. So there's sermons that I've got staged, ready and available from recent work. And yeah, my kids are probably going to hear that sermon a second time because they probably heard it the first time back home. They're accustomed to it. There are blessings and curses to the preacher life, and that might be one of them. But first time, maybe the second time the sermon is better. Who knows?
For me, and I said this earlier, most of the time I'm going to decline because most of the time I'm actually going to try to plan to be someplace, quite honestly, where I want to hear that guy speak. Mm-hmm. And I want my kids to hear that guy speak. Right. There are occasions, let me say this, where friends know I'm going to be there and they ask me to speak, and that is completely different in that sense. It's a judgment call, okay? It's a judgment call for me, but I am not like Phil where I'm never going to turn down the opportunity. There's going to be some times where I'm going to say, no, I'd rather just be on vacation and I'd rather just be in the pew and hear you speak, and I know you got great things to come.
Right, and generally I'm talking about those emergent things like Edwin's talking about. If we're having a dialogue about it and someone says, hey, you're going to be in town, or
right.
Like what's going on with you right now? Do you need a break? And my answer would be, I really need a break and I'm looking forward to hearing you. That's a dialogue as opposed to, we need you to speak. We would like for you to bring a message to the congregation.
And the one thing I really don't like, by the way, is that 5 minutes before church is going to start, where, quite frankly, there's sometimes that has been offered to me more obligatory. Like, Terry's here, oh, we should ask him to speak, like they have to. And in those cases, maybe it's a younger guy. I'd rather hear the younger guy. I'd rather be encouragement to him. And that's going to be a judgment call from everybody. I think the greater message I'm trying to share is, don't feel like you have to speak somewhere on your vacation because somebody asked you to. It's okay to say no. And it's okay not to do that. And look, my go-to sermon is a sermon my kids like to hear. It's a sermon they request me to preach in those circumstances. Edwin and I joke around about everybody has their Mona Lisa. It's kind of my Mona Lisa. So it's a go-to sermon last minute, and I have it, and I could do it without even notes probably at this point. It's just sometimes it's good to sit back and not be the guy for a Sunday. And I think that's a greater message is sometimes you need some Sundays where you're not the guy. You need to sit there. You need to hold your wife's hand during the whole sermon. You need to be present with her instead of in the pulpit. There's something that is very therapeutic about that needs to happen on a somewhat consistent basis. That's really the message I want you to hear.
Right. Jay makes a good point, too, that from the role standpoint, there will be a day when you're not the guy that's there. And the guy that follows you there needs to have had the space to allow him to have those breaks. And Edwin being Edwin has the question. I'll read it in a second.
I called this earlier. I said this was going to happen. So the devil, the advocate, whatever he is, has spoken.
In that space, in all of this, I'll get to Edwin in a second. I'm pulling all the pieces before I respond.
Yeah, get to Shane's comment first before we do the work DA.
Yeah, so really then it is about mentorship, leadership for the future. If you're allotted X number of Sundays, weeks to be away, and you don't go through the process of helping the church and the congregation and the community grow in a way that's comfortable for them, it's possible you're doing more harm than good by pouring yourself over the altar of work. Yeah. And the group will be okay. It's going to be all right. If you have an 18-year-old give an enthusiastic lesson the Sunday you're out of town, it could be the exact thing that they need. Yeah, it may not be as deep as that subject could have been approached by one of the elders or the evangelist there, but that balance is healthy. And so you've got to find a way to incorporate those things. Regarding...
but hold on. By the way, in regards to that, I know of a situation where a guy followed another guy. And one of the things the church brought up was, well, the preacher before you was in his office by 6 o'clock every morning. Those kind of comparisons are going to happen. You can't help that. And probably the guy that wasn't in his office till 11 o'clock needed to hear that, by the way. But also as a congregation, you need to be careful you're not constantly comparing in those ways as well. But as Shane said, you want to make your job easier for the next guy because you're not going to be there forever. So whatever you do, you want to make it easier for the next guy. Now, back to the devil DA, or the do the work DA, as we're going to call Edwin from now on. do the work devil's advocate. Um, I think there's a balance to this whole thing of, yes, the Sabbath was a day of rest and it was a time to devote to worship. Um, Nobody is saying that when you take vacations or days off that you don't still spend time meditating, offering praise to God, praying. That is not what we're saying. Um, I would add that while the Sabbath day was a day of worship, it was not an entire day of worship. That there was periods of rest and worship in there. And the overall point is, and I think we always need to realize we speak in generalities. You need time away from this work. That's really what we're trying to say. On a regular weekly basis, you need time away, and you need time away on an annual basis. And I think additionally, let me say this for married couples. Even in a marriage, as good as marriages could be, there has to be times that you take breaks from one another doing things, because it's healthy for the relationship. And that means that you do different things. Like, I'll give an example. I've got friends who their wives golf with them. When I did golf, I didn't really want my wife learning how to golf. And that wasn't anything ugly against her. If she wanted to, which she did not, that would have been fine. But I didn't want her to feel obligated like she had to go golfing with me because we could never be apart. Just like I'm not going to go to quilting class with my wife. That's not my gig. There are things that we need apart from each other that give us that break and that rest in order to maintain the healthy relationship that we have. And I think that's true of your work as well. You are somewhat married to your work, but that doesn't mean that you don't need some time away from the work. By the way, your personal praise, worship, and devotion is not part of your work. That's your personal praise, work, and devotion. And I think that's one of the keys to all of this that we're kind of going to do. So like, for instance, this weekend, every morning I woke up before anybody else. Our balcony looked over the ocean. I was out there with my coffee. I was out there with my Bible. I was out there with prayer. I started my day that way. I started my day in a way watching the sun come up it was fantastic. It was relaxing. There was devotion to the Lord. That didn't stop because I was on vacation. But the vacation allows me to step away from the work for a moment. That needs to happen as well.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, I could be wrong, that the original Sabbath was a day of rest.
Yeah.
And then it expanded in its context with um, attributes that then would be defined by us as worship. And if I wanted to really get my theme tag here, it's rest as they go into the garden. But um, you
There
know,
was.
um, there is some value of making sure that we have a distinction in these rest cycles, that there's physical rest and there's spiritual rest. And I think that's what Edwin is kind of getting towards, is that spiritual rest comes in that relationship moment, perhaps by prayer, meditation on the creation, on God. Shane's comment about that article from How to Be an Emotionally Healthy Leader connects to one more aspect that I think is important. And this rhythm concept of life that is biblical in its structure from the Old Testament, there's one more component that I think is really important. I want to advocate for evangelists to build a relationship with someone who can help them navigate those emotional trials. It can and should be marital at times, but there are also aspects of the work where you're going to need advisement from someone who shares an insight that's crucial to you. And maybe that means you need a counselor who's trained in emotional issues. Maybe you need a counselor who's trained in spiritual issues. Maybe you need a counselor who's trained in a way to help you navigate your personal conflicts better. We need to be willing to open up to a point to be self-aware and self-reflective. As you go up in the responsibility tree, and the minute you start to preach, you are stepping up to a higher level of responsibility. You are, if you want to be the most effective that you can, you are required to be aware of your weaknesses and then work within that structure to not let your weaknesses have the appearance of being your strength. And I think that's a struggle. I know that was a struggle for me in the first, let's say, half of my work as an evangelist. I know that it can be a struggle present tense, and I know it probably will be a struggle in the future tense. And often it can interact with stuff like Ed was talking about, where we don't keep these things in the space they belong in.
Yeah.
Where we allow spiritual stuff to overflow into moments where we just need to be physically resting. Like we need to go to sleep because
Well,
sleep is
Edwin,
good.
that's Edwin's point. I think really was that your personal devotion time is not part of your work time. And for a lot of us, that blends together because we'll do a lot of our personal devotion time in our office because it's peaceful and it's quiet. But when you step away from the work, you're stepping away from sermon preparation, you're stepping away from article writing, class preparation. You're not stepping away from the Lord. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that's important. And sometimes, I think one of the things about this is sometimes these kind of sabbatical moments are there in order to allow you to be closer to the Lord because, quite honestly, sometimes the work interferes with your personal devotion time to the Lord. And that's really the challenge in all of this.
Right.
Sometimes things are so much of a struggle in the work that your personal devotion suffers as a result of that,
Right.
and you need time away from the work part.
This concept then can bleed over into the entire congregation's rotation of things. It's going to present opportunities to eliminate teacher burnout, that teach the
Yeah,
same age bracket over and over again, leader burnout, all of these things can now kind of move in a way that makes everyone more healthy. And you can either do it ad hoc, where you just kind of you're aware of it and you make sure you rotate things around, or you can build a structure around it to ensure that no one gets overly burdened or overly territorial on the other side of it with a particular part of the congregation's work. I
yeah.
think that's something really important for all of us to consider. Any last comments for today, at least, Terry? I mean, we talk about Thanksgiving and turkey a lot, but
Look, Thanksgiving week, I'm gonna tell you, Thursday and Friday I'm out. You're not gonna find me at the office. Like I'm gonna rest on those days. That's a planned, intentional rest, right? I mean, that's I think all of us are down that path, and nothing better than turkey and dressing. I'll throw that
yeah,
out there one last time. Nothing better than turkey or dressing. I don't know why we don't eat that more often, by the way. That's one of my things. I told my wife we're going to start smoking turkeys more often. That's going to be a
yeah. I
staple in
think
our house.
the discount turkey season is upon us, and they hold
Yep,
well in freezers.
they
So
do. They do.
that turkeys and briskets hold well in freezers, just so everybody knows.
And you buy those boneless turkey breasts. I'm just going to say there's a very good potential the Francis House is done buying pre-packaged lunch meat. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Smoke one of those bad boys, slice it up, you're good to go.
yeah. That'll
Good
that'll
days
be an
ahead.
occurrence because I'm pretty sure on my smoker I can get a full bird and a full breast, and so we might be double stacking that way. I do want to thank
Yeah.
everyone for jumping in the chat. A lot of great insight in the
Even
chat
the do
today.
the work DA, we want to thank him for showing up, by the way. By
Right.
the way, I will say this. He is like my emotional support. For those who don't know, I give Edwin a hard time. And but like he and I are almost a daily conversation on the phone.
That explains a lot.
Thankful for him. I know I need better friends. Thankful, no, seriously, thankful for him. He's helped me through a lot of times. I know I've helped him through a lot of times. Love him. And look, Phil's in that too. There's a lot of, we were talking about that. That sometimes that phone call is the rest you need for that moment, by the way. That's
Yeah.
to throw out there. But anyway, that's a whole other thing on mentorship and companionship. So
Hey,
maybe
and if
that,
folks need someone to talk to, Terry and I are happy to listen and give bad advice and
yeah,
point you towards who have good advice. Um,
yeah.
Next Tuesday, we'll be back again for Do the Work. And just so you know, the week of Turkey Day, there will not be a Do the Work that week. We
No,
are going to not be engaging in the conversations that day. So
sorry, we're out.
we're going to encourage you to take a break too that week in various ways. But take care, everybody. May God bless you in your endeavors, and we can help you in your work some way. Let us know.